I'm Tim Rowlands in for Vinnie Politan. We are investigating some of the possibilities that could explain the death of John O'Keefe. And we're asking the question, could two things be true at once? Here's the story. Rumors have been swirling ever since Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found dead in the snow outside a home in Canton, Massachusetts. In the search to find out how he died, there have been questions surrounding the people inside the home of 34 Fairview Road, the investigators, and, of course, the woman accused of killing him, his girlfriend, Karen Reed. Both sides have different explanations of the evidence, which includes text messages, a broken taillight, strange injuries, and much more. Prosecutors in Reed's retrial are again alleging that she hit and killed John O'Keefe with her SUV. But are there other possibilities? And could there be a cover-up? So in this retrial, we're basically, again, going through these theories of what might have happened from the prosecution and the defense. They've got their theories, but what about the other? There's so many people who have come up with different versions of what possibly could have happened here, including whether more than one of these scenarios could have played out basically on the property of Brian Albert on that night in 2022. And the question all began with what Karen did or didn't do in the wee hours of the morning while behind the wheel of that SUV, of course. O'Keefe's friends, Jen McCabe, testifying in the retrial about what she heard Reed say, and this is a big part of the case, right after they found John in the snow.
When she got on the phone, I had told her, Karen, I saw you guys outside of my sister's house. And then she told me she didn't remember being there. And then she went on to say, she started saying, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? And then she just was just all over the place, like screaming my name, screaming so many different things. She was hard to follow or understand.
All right, so that brings us to our first question. Could two things be true at once? Could Karen have hit John, but not killed him? Let's bring in forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. He's also the host of the very popular Body Bags podcast, and former New York police officer Mike Gould. Good Friday evening to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time here. I want to show some of the images of Karen Reed's taillights and some of the arguments about it. Here's part of each side's closing argument in last year's trial, starting with the prosecution saying the evidence points to the taillight damage coming from this collision and that it was John O'Keefe that caused the damage to Karen Reed's SUV.
You can see the damage consistent with the taillight at each and every point. You see the damage consistent with the taillight from the 507 video. You see the damage consistent from the 822 video from Lieutenant Ray from the cruiser camera video when he's pulling into the driveway. You see the damage consistent from the Dighton video at the defendant's home. You see the damage consistent from the right here, February 1st, 2022, when the search warrant is conducted, Ms. Hartnett removes all those pieces from the vehicle.
No DNA was found on the interior of that taillight. The taillight that they now claim crashed into his arm and shattered. No blood was found anywhere on that taillight or any taillight pieces. And no tissue was found anywhere on that taillight or any taillight pieces. But we're to believe that that taillight literally exploded on John's arm at 25 miles an hour with 1,000 pounds of pressure.
So, Joseph Scott Morgan, what is your take? Is it possible she hit him, bumps him, and then maybe something else happens to him? He trips and falls, he slips on the ice, and something else happened that Karen Reed may have A, hit him, but didn't kill him. That a possible scenario?
I would find that difficult to believe, because you have to understand there's another contributing factor here, and that's hypothermia. If he's initially struck, now he's got, the thing that's so fascinating about this case is what actually the forensic pathologist testified to, and he's got bilateral raccoon eyes, which means he's got a basilar skull fracture. He's directly impacted in the face. Most of the time, you're going to see that with a single impact event. I can't imagine somebody punching him in the face or kicking him in the face and that sort of thing. It would have to come from a large object that has a certain amount of velocity that could drive into his face, fracture the small bones on the floor of his skull. That's why we call it a basilar skull fracture, the bottom. And then concurrently, you've got this other impact injury in the horizontal plane that is a laceration with the head being struck as it goes down. I'm fascinated by that. In addition to that, one of the more fascinating things for me are the insults to his arm.
So that's a great question, Mike. What happened to John O'Keefe? The first jury couldn't get their head around it.
Right. And I don't think this jury will either, Ted. Thanks for having me. So I'm one of the people you talked about that has an alternative theory to both the prosecution and the defense. And two things absolutely can be correct at the same time. So alcoholic-induced hypothermia is a real thing. So could a car, 25-mile, most people survive being hit by cars, particularly under this 30, 40 miles an hour. They may get serious injuries, but the survivability of the accident is pretty high, according to the National Transportation Safety Board. So I think that contact was made. I laid there. I was at the scene. I laid on the ground at night, in the dark, in the rain. And I can tell you there's rocks. There's in front of that flagpole are some concrete bricks, if I remember correctly. So two things can be correct. I think there was a lot of alcohol involved on both parts. Karen Reed, there's something called alcoholic amnesia, which we know as blackouts. Maybe you haven't had one, but in my younger days, I've had those things where I don't remember what I did.
So what's your theory? What do you think happened? I'm interested.
My theory is, in my world, in my universe, this was probably a reckless driving, leaving the scene. Intoxication was a huge element to it. It wasn't an intentional, premeditated murder. You know, Ted, if I murdered everybody I had an unsatisfactory relationship, I'd be a serial killer. So I don't see these things. There's just, everybody's trying desperately to get to beyond a reasonable doubt. But this thing is riddled with reasonable doubt. As far as I'm concerned, every piece of evidence, including the ME, every expert so far, including the arms.
Let's talk about what Joseph Morgan was just talking about. Is that is the condition of the body? You got the arm. You have Let's listen to a description of what John's body looked like when he was found dead. Here is his friend Carrie Roberts testifying in this retrial about what she says she saw.
The body was completely covered, but his head was completely covered, so I started to dig around his face and his eyes, and his left eye was fine, but his right eye looked like it was huge. His legs were covered, his arms were by his side, he was on his back. Karen had lifted up his shirt, so now his shirt was down, but I was doing chest compressions so you could see his clothing. He had blood coming out of his nose and his mouth, and when I put the baby blankets under the back of him, there was blood on the blanket, so I think he had a cut on the back of his head.
Joseph Scott Morgan, if he is hit for the way you described his facial injuries, he would have had to have been hit by Karen in the face, correct? If indeed that's what caused his death? And I love the fact that snowplow's going by.
I think it's probably the most likely scenario. And here's another bit too. Those taillights are smooth and non-porous, so you're not going to get like a pattern injury. Let's just say that Mr. O'Keefe had been in a Donnybrook with somebody at some point in time, or several people, where he'd been stamped on, punched, those sorts of things. Those are going to leave very specific identifiers. You're going to have superficial abrasion of the skin, underlying hematomas, and they'll be in multiple places. If you want to go with this idea that somebody had, bum rushed him and started beating him down in this environment. Even, I've seen many cases where people, for instance, have been stomped on, and you actually see the pattern of the shoe. You don't really see this here. You've just got like this directed force like this. If we were to believe the taillight scenario, it's a smooth, non-porous surface, so there's not really a lot of a pattern there. that would create, something left behind. One other thing is that we can't forget about what they talked about with the little glass shards that are in his face. Again, that's an impact-related event. You begin to think about it, somebody right-hand dependent, they're holding a glass, they get struck, this gets driven into their face. I don't know. But, as my colleague said, there's so many different scenarios and potentials here for lethality. I don't know if they can necessarily be effectively measured.
Do you, Mike Gould, rule out the snowplow at all? I mean, Higgins had one, and then Lucky comes rolling around twice in terms of, maybe the arm.
Yeah, I do rule it out, as well as the dog bite, the dog attack. One of the things that I do is examine dog bites, professionally, and I've looked at thousands of them. And these, if anything, are the marks of a scavenger made post-mortem while the body was lying in the snow. If you want to disagree with that, these marks do not resemble a large dog. It would be more in the size of a Chihuahua. My point is it's a scavenger, the striations, the scratches, and you can actually see the dental impressions of an animal in the middle. If you look at the striations to the left and to the right, those are claw marks created, in my opinion, by a possum. And then you see the nibble marks in the middle. You couldn't get those because nobody who was going to lay down with their arm out and allow a dog to scratch and nibble at them or bite at them. It didn't happen. This was post-mortem. And if it was a car that hit him, this would be hematomas, broken bones. So I don't buy that. I don't know why the defense is going with this dog attack. This wouldn't even require an emergency room visit, these marks. They're not bleeding. They're not vascular. So, no, I don't buy that.
Okay, well, the arm is interesting, though. You wonder what happened there, but to your point, maybe it is the scavenger. Guests are going to stay put. We're going to bring them back later in the show. But coming up, could there have been two fights? One with Karen and one with someone else in the house? Stay with us.
I feel pretty about how this morning went down. I know you said sorry, but it really stung.
Is Karen Reed a killer girlfriend?
She's guilty.
Or the scapegoat in an elaborate cover-up?
Karen Reed was framed!
Karen Reed is accused of murdering her police officer boyfriend.
Defendant stated repeatedly, I hit him.
She may end up taking the stand.
Her first trial ended with a hung jury.
They haven't proven anything.
Will a jury finally agree on a verdict? We know who did it.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
I feel pretty about how this morning went down. I know you said sorry, but it really stung, especially when I've been trying pretty hard lately. I feel like a loser turning around, just coming back over after everything you said.
Not sure what else you want me to do. I said I'm sorry, and I was out of line. If you prefer to stay home, I totally get it.
Things in my own life have been difficult too,
I know.
Tell me if you're interested in someone else. Can't think of any other reason you've been like this.
Nope, things haven't been great between us for a while. Ever consider that?
All right, a dramatic reading there of the text between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe in the hours before he ended up dead. They were arguing while also sort of making plans to go out that night. We sat through that excruciating day of testimony last week. There's evidence of a fight, let's face it. These two were not getting along, right? The retrial, the prosecution has questioned an investigator about also finding a broken cocktail glass. Let's watch.
You see the end of the leaf blower?
I do.
There's an object just below it at like 7 o'clock. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you discover something in that area?
We did.
What did you discover?
It's a cocktail glass.
And remember, Karen Reed said that she picked out a piece of glass out of John's face after they found him. It brings us to our next question. In our investigation, could two things be happening at the same time? Could there have been two fights? One fight we already know about. That's the one between Karen and John over texts that night. And we heard those voicemails of Karen after she dropped him off. Could he have fought with her and then went in the house and maybe fought with somebody inside or outside the house, another person? Let's bring in Massachusetts attorney Richard Grundy. He knows this case as well as anybody. And on the phone, back with us, Karen Reed supporter Nick Rocco. All right, Richard, what's your take on that possibility? 2 fights? We know of one, a verbal one, between John and Karen.
Well, anything's possible, right? Particularly in the world of Karen Reed trials. It gets to that point, though, when you're in a position, you're putting 2 stories forth, and which one looks more likely? There's plenty of evidence that these individuals were arguing back and forth, which seems to create some coinciding with the events that happened. If you go with that there's a separate fight happens afterwards, and that's the fatal fight, now you open up that Pandora's box that the defense has been wrestling with for 2 trials now, because you've got basically a family gathering, men, women, children, and the argument is that for some reason, several of them decide just to pummel this individual to death, take the body out, drop it on your own front lawn, not remove it any further than that, and then get a conspiracy going that involves everybody in the house, men, women, and children, involves EMTs, and one woman who is summoned by Karen Reed to go look for him. So that's the defense's quandary, is that they have put themselves in a position where their juries start comparing 2 stories. And instead of saying, hey, look, the Commonwealth, you didn't prove your case. That's that. You know, if I don't know what happened, if I feel I don't know what happened at the end of the day, that's a not guilty.
Yeah, it's reasonable doubt.
If you leave me, but the first trial, they left them in a position where they didn't follow that instruction. They were like, I got 2 stories, I can't pick one.
Right, and then it's a gamble. Yeah, I totally agree. Nick Rocco, do you believe now here, you know, so much time's gone by, we're here into the second, the retrial, Jen McCabe did much better on the stand. Do you believe that there was not only the fight inside the house and Chloe the dog went to town, do you believe the fight happened? And then also, if you do, you have to believe, to Richard's point, that all of these other people are part of this cover-up.
Well, yeah, we saw the text messages between Karen and John earlier in the day, and they were obviously arguing about, you know, something that happened that night or potentially that she got the kids Dunkin' Donuts. But at the same time, when John first, potentially went into that house, everybody was mainly in the kitchen area. In the layout of that house, when you first walk in the door, you have a study to the left, and the basement door is maybe 5 feet. Right when you walk into the house, there's a door right there. So initially, there could have potentially been people who didn't see John actually go into the house if he had gone right into the basement. So initially, some of those people may not have actually seen John, and they're telling the truth that, hey, we didn't see John come into the house. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, you have nobody placing John O'Keefe on that lawn. Nobody heard anything outside the house. If John O'Keefe was struck by that vehicle, there would have been some type of noise. The video camera across the street that they claim, was only facing the grass and it wasn't facing the street, but that camera also records audio. There would have been some type of noise to hear John O'Keefe being struck by a vehicle. Now, we know there was 0.8 inches of snow on the ground when Jennifer McCabe, Matt McCabe, Julie, and Sarah all left the house. That's not enough snow to cover a body. When they back out of that driveway, the headlights are going to be directly on the flagpole. If Matt McCabe is driving as safe as they claim he was, his eyes are on the road, his eyes would have been peeled directly on John O'Keefe. So the fact that nobody can put him outside, including the plow driver, and then also including the fact that there was a Ford Edge parked directly in front of where John O'Keefe's body was found around 3 in the morning, and that person didn't see John O'Keefe on the lawn, well, where was he then? Most likely he wasn't put out until later in the morning, and that's why nobody potentially saw him on the lawn. So, yeah, I do believe that 2 fights could have happened in the sense of an argument and then a beating inside the house, yeah.
And you think he could have slipped in and wouldn't have been noticed by some of the people? And they were all, they were drinking. They testified to that in the house. Maybe he gets down to the basement. Let's play a clip from an interview that Karen did. This was played at the retrial. She acknowledges that she was arguing with John when she dropped him off at 34 Fairview and explains what was going through her mind later on.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? could have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him. He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Richard, at the end of the day, to your point earlier, if you force the jury to believe your story over the other story and not just go reasonable doubt and more vague and bring up a bunch of different theories, you're kind of hamstringing your defense, are you not?
You are. I mean, either way you go here is obviously a gamble. This is a case where there's convincing evidence on either side. And in that situation, I think, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see the defense is going to go with start right in your opening and say, ladies and gentlemen, jurors, judge, my client, me, we're here for one reason only. We're here because the district attorney's office summonsed us, because they said they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt as to what happened. And they have a burden to prove that to you to a moral certainty. And if you'll be instructed, if they are unable to do that, my client is entitled, that's what the judge will tell you, entitled to a finding of not guilty. And I'm going to point out to you so many inconsistencies, things that weren't done, that shouldn't be done, that the Commonwealth, the only party here who has a burden to prove anything to you, cannot meet their standard.
Right.
And my client is entitled to that verdict of not guilty.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And to Nick's point too, where was John? Where was he? No one saw him outside, no one saw him inside. So that's a mystery. Is that you just play into that? Because it is a mystery. So many people have different theories of this case. Our guests are going to stay with us. Could there have been an animal attack and a slip and fall? That's our next question. We'll talk about it next. VPI on a Friday. I'm Ted Rowlands in for Vinnie tonight. The national attention on the Karen Read case continues to grow, in part because of the allegations of a police cover-up, and also, of course, because of the different theories about how John O'Keefe may have died. Here's the story. On a bitterly cold morning in January of 2022, Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found dead outside of 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. As the snow piled up around his body, so did the questions. O'Keefe's girlfriend, Karen Read, is accused of second-degree murder, with prosecutors alleging she struck him with her SUV after a night out drinking. In her retrial, her defense is pointing fingers at people who were inside the home that night, including Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. They're also questioning the integrity of the investigation and putting a spotlight on Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael Proctor, arguing there's a conspiracy to blame Karen Read for John O'Keefe's death. And some of the evidence that has caused a lot of debate in this case, of course, are the photos of John O'Keefe's arm, the scratches. There is not a definitive answer on that. I mean, let's face it. People look at this and it just gives you pause. In the trial last year in front of Judge Cannoni, the defense presented a dog bite expert who testified that these injuries are indeed consistent with a dog attack. The prosecution argued against that theory.
Were you able to confidently come to any conclusions or opinions about the nature of the injuries suffered by John O'Keefe, specifically as they relate to John O'Keefe's right arm?
Yes.
What is your opinion and conclusion concerning those injuries?
Those injuries appear to be consistent with an animal attack.
Can you be more specific in terms of the type of animal, or are you relegated to simply an animal attack?
Well, they are consistent with a large dog attack. There's a combination of both what I consider bite wounds and scratch wounds on the arm.
And that brings us to our next question in our investigation. Could two things be true at once? Could there have been an animal attack and maybe a slip and fall? Let's bring back our guests. Joined by forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. He's also the host of Body Bags, the podcast, and former New York police officer Mike Gould. Mike, you referenced earlier, you don't think it's a dog attack. You think it's a possum, I guess, or a raccoon. And I like your point that post-mortem makes more sense because, you wouldn't let an animal keep attacking your arm after the first scratch or bite, right? There'd be a retraction. But what if he's out cold? What if John O'Keefe, our question, what if he fell? What if Karen didn't hit him? He's walking in, he took 35 steps according to his watch, and he falls on the ice, hits his head, and now there's an attack of some sort.
Yeah, 100%. I would, calling it attack and having a scavenger or even a dog feeding on the arm, not to be graphic and all due respect to the deceased, this is very common. This is when scavengers come out at nighttime, precisely at the time this would have taken place. And I do believe that. Like I said, I laid right in front of that flagpole. If you're highly intoxicated and you get bumped or pushed or hit by a car and you fall down and smash your face into the bricks that I believe was surrounding that flagpole, and then now your body temperature is going to attract the animals, whether it's dogs or in this case, I strongly believe it was a scavenger coming to feed at the garbage cans, and they came across this, started scratching, nibbling. I can see the dental impressions on there. I know how many teeth a possum has. I know those are striations to the left and to the right, and those are nibble marks in the middle. Wouldn't require hospitalization. So and then the animal would be scared away. There's by any sound coming from the house, the animal would be scared away and be gone. You never see possums out, generally speaking.
Oh boy, Hank Brennan should reach out to you, Mike Gould.
I don't believe either side. So.
Joseph Scott Morgan, what's your take on the Commonwealth went hard in Karen Reed 1 with the idea that the tail light caused the injuries on the arm of John O'Keefe. Would they be smarter to say we don't know, or do they have to go all in on the taillight causing the arm injuries?
The taillight didn't cause those injuries. When I first saw it, again, I'll load these many months ago, my first thought was, having worked for the coroner in New Orleans and worked for the ME in Atlanta for over 20 years, it looked like that these may have been generated by the undercarriage of a vehicle, potentially, with this kind of reaction. I've seen marks that are similar to this on individuals that have been run over by vehicles. They're kind of randomized, and that was really my first blush. I think the answer to that, though, that makes it a bit more confusing when there's like an image that I saw that had popped up relative to the sweatshirt, and they have little arrows pointing up and down the arm, and those look very punctate. And when we say punctate, it's like a puncture that goes relative to something piercing the clothing. And I would be very, very curious as to how thorough the testing would have been, an examination on that garment that he had on.
Could a snowplow cause that?
I think that you would have something that would be much more over the top than what we're seeing. If you saw somebody run over with a snowplow, you're going to have a level of, you're still going to have a level of mutilation that would take place. And this ain't no dog. I've had victims of dog attacks throughout my career, including postmortem injuries on people found dead by animals, and those that have been killed by large dogs as well, ranging from children to the elderly. And once the dog gets into somebody, they don't quit. They go and go and go. And you're still left with this idea that he's got this massive complex of skull fractures in the front, and then he's got this mass of skull fractures in the back. And according to the ME, these don't communicate. These are two separate events. So you've got this massing that's happened on the frontal aspect I think that's initial impact. And then you've got this other complex in the back. The fracture marks, when you look at her diagram, nowhere do they marry up there. So it's two separate impacts, head, face, and posterior.
So during last year's trial, the medical examiner testified about John O'Keefe's head injuries, describing just that. Let's listen.
Observing or looking at the skull fractures and their pattern, there appeared to be a central point with fractures radiating or originating from that central point and going into other parts of the skull. I knew at that point that Mr. O'Keefe's head had come in contact with a blunt object.
Would that be sort of the point of impact between the blunt object and Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Right.
Now, with reference to the fractures that you would observed, how extensive were the fractures that you observed, the multiple ones?
Well, there were multiple fractures. So by definition, multiple fractures in multiple chambers or parts of the skull. So I would say they were extensive.
Mike Gould, we don't know what happened. Isn't this reasonable doubt?
No, completely. I find reasonable doubt in every element of this. And again, it's kind of like a Rorschach test. When I see that arm injury, I practically see an animal on top creating these injuries. As Joseph said, there's puncture wounds in the middle. There's scratches on the side created by razor-sharp claws, not that of a dog. Dogs' nails aren't quite that sharp. They use it for digging holes, where opossums and raccoons use it for climbing trees. So I just see it so clearly. I could actually, as I said, see the dental impressions of the incisors, the canine teeth, etc.
So bottom line at Joseph Scott Morgan, what do you think happened to John O'Keefe?
Struck by a blunt object with sufficient amount of force to generate a fracture complex in the floor of his skull on the front side, and then concurrently, or just following that, a large complex in the posterior basal skull. And in my experience, it takes a lot of force to do this, certainly more than a dog. And if that's what people are opining, I don't see that. And, the only other time, maybe with a large blunt object. I'm sorry?
Karen Reed's SUV hit him in the face the first one, then he falls backwards, and that's how he picks up the other one, maybe on the curb?
Yeah, that was my supposition, from the beginning. That's kind of what I felt like, but again, the waters are so muddied in this case at this point in time. We're into a second trial at this point. And, in my way of thinking, most cases are won and lost in the first 5 minutes from rolling up on the scene. And that was less than sufficient, put it to you that way.
Yeah, and let's face it, everyone who watches this has a different version-ish of what happened. People say, I think she did it, but they don't know exactly how it happened, or conversely, she didn't do it, they did it. It's a lot of questions. Joseph Scott Morgan, Mike Gould, enjoy your weekend. Thank you so much for your valuable time on a Friday. We appreciate it. Could Trooper Michael Proctor be disgraced for his text, but not be part of a conspiracy?
And he's been disgraced by his own agency, not by us, by the Massachusetts State Police.
It's been my passion to work in nursing homes.
I found 911. One of our residents passed away.
On the next Interview with a Killer.
You watched and stood by while your patient was lying there being tortured.
What else was I supposed to do?
That's so conniving. You understand that? So much for your career in caretaking.
Interview with a Killer, season finale, Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
He's been disgraced by his own agency, not by us, by the Massachusetts State Police. Investigated, suspended, and fired. Conduct that included bias in favor of his friends, the all-powerful Albert family, and bias against my client, Miss Reed, the outsider. Do you have any idea how hard it is for a state trooper to get fired? Well, the evidence is going to show that Michael Proctor earned it.
There has been a lot of attention on former Massachusetts State Trooper Michael Proctor. The defense says he was the lead investigator. The Commonwealth says, well, he was kind of second in command. And his actions are evidence of an investigation full of mistakes. We watched it all play out in that first trial. His inappropriate texts about Karen Reed, they have been read out loud in court. In the reach out part of them, he had two different text threads, some with some investigators, other with his high school buddies, but the jury's getting a feel for it. Let's watch Proctor reading them himself. Remember that cringy moment in the last year's trial? There are texts to his coworkers about the defendant.
These came from me. Funny, I'm going through his client's phone. No nude so far. I hate that man. I truly hate him. I responded, yeah, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. No ass.
Yeah, she's a babe. Who's the she?
Miss Reed.
That was very uncomfortable. Now, will Proctor be back this time around? The Commonwealth likely won't call him. Let's bring in our next question here into our investigation. Could Proctor be a disgraced trooper for his text, but not be part of a conspiracy? Let's bring back our guests. In Massachusetts, attorney Richard Grundy, and on the phone, Karen Reed supporter Nick Rocco. Nick, isn't it viable that, yes, he's a vile person, but didn't partake in a cover-up?
Not necessarily. It started when he wrote that first affidavit for when he towed Karen Reed's vehicle. He put multiple times that he towed that vehicle at 5:30 p.m. until the alarm.com footage came out that it was actually 4:17, and then it turned to that was a Scrivener's error. Then you go to the glass that was found on Karen Reed's bumper. None of the glass on her bumper matches up to the cocktail glass, but there was one piece on her bumper that matched up to a piece of glass that only Michael Proctor found and had custody of. So, those pieces of glass also didn't match up to the cocktail glass. So where did those come from? His name is all over this case. No matter what Yuri Buchanan wants to say, oh, he was the case manager, not the lead detective, whatever they want to say, his name is written all over this case. He doesn't write proper reports about any of this. He had the clothes in his custody, no chain of custody that he's provided. So it goes in line with the conspiracy that he was trying to hide things and manipulate evidence in this case.
Richard Grundy, do you think there's a chance that he is unbecoming of a Massachusetts State Trooper because of his conduct, but wasn't involved in a cover-up?
Yeah, I think that it's a possibility. You know, I spent 25 years prosecuting homicides and obviously working hand in hand with troopers and police officers, and they are people. I don't know if the general community in Massachusetts, what their view of police officers is. Certainly the reputation of police officers has been tarnished a great deal in recent history, so they might not hold all that high standards. When you focus in, now Nick makes some great points, and he's got a handle on all of this stuff, probably better than any juror would, certainly now that he's through it twice. But most of what drew the attention to Proctor was that he's a vile human being, and they are in all walks of life, and people deal with them all the time. So now, if the jurors aren't quite as good as hooking things up as Nick is, they see somebody who, I find distasteful, but how does this affect the case? How does this affect my view of the case? I think what helps.
Does he have to enter the courtroom, Richard? Does the defense need him in the courtroom? And do they need him to read those again? Do they need the visual for jurors?
So I think today what you saw was they set a stage to the point where they could draw the curtain with the questioning of Proctor. But I think it's like this, like any witness with a jury. If you tease them enough about it, you got to put them up there just so they can see and hear it out of his own words. One of the first rules of prosecution is if you've got warts, you got to show them. You got to put them in the best light you can, bring them to the jury, and so that you're not hiding them. So Hank Brennan didn't miss that. He's made a sincere calculation with much thought, I'm sure, as to whether or not he's going to put him on. So perhaps,
and if he doesn't, he could, he may want to cross him. He'd rather be in that position than to bring him on and work his way through direct, given all of the warts to speak of. Nick, does Proctor bleed into, and in the first trial, was it your belief that his behavior, his everything bled into the whole investigation and tarnished Buchanan and the other investigators as well?
Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, one of the big things as well that the jury did hear, but I think it would be best to, I believe that the jury now has a picture of what this guy is, and they want to see him. I think if the prosecution doesn't put him forward, they're going to be wondering, like, wait a minute, why didn't you show us the lead investigator? But let's not forget about the fact that he has family ties to these people. So right off the bat, he was texting his sister, hey, I just interviewed Chris Albert, and I just interviewed Jen McCabe, and during our interview with Jen McCabe, she brought you up. So right from the get-go, Michael Proctor was compromised in the sense of he had family connections to them, and he's telling his sister about these people that she knows. And they offer gifts to him for the day that Karen Reed was indicted and so on. So I think at this point, if Hank Brennan doesn't produce Michael Proctor to the jury, I don't think they're going to be happy with that because they hear so much about him, and it's like, well, where is he? Why are you hiding this guy from us? And then, yes.
And then Jackson brings him in and reminds the jury who brought him in the close. Richard, Proctor getting fired, is that helpful for the defense? Or can the Commonwealth spin it?
Yeah, I mean, in the first trial, I think that the Commonwealth should have took this on by presenting him as a vile human being, tarnished, and presented him as, you didn't do anything in this investigation that we need, but I'm throwing you to the jury because they have a right to see you. So they can still try and do that now, and I guess that's what they are trying to do. We're proving our case without him, and we can dust you up just as well. The one thing that Jackson did in his opening, which may create a bit of a problem for him, depending on how closely the jury was paying attention, is, it was very smoothly done, but he says, he was fired, how hard it is to get fired. And then he starts talking about his bias. He says he got fired because he's got bias. Well, that's not why he was fired. So that would give an opportunity for the prosecution to say, no, you got a vile mouth, that's why you got fired.
Right, and they could do that on cross for sure if they indeed don't bring him in. There are many possible answers to explain how John O'Keefe died, but all that matters is, in the end, what does this jury think? This jury, not the other jury, it's the new jury. They'll have to decide what's more convincing. The prosecution's theory that Karen Reed hit and killed John O'Keefe with her vehicle, or the defense theory that something else happened, something that investigators worked very hard to cover up. And that is reasonable doubt. And that is exactly what the defense is trying to get to at this point. Have they gotten there? Well, the case is still rolling along. I'm Ted Rowlands in for Vinnie Politan. Thanks to all of our guests. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.